The foundation of all that we believe and understand about God is rooted and grounded right here in the book of Genesis. Originally, it was a book written to Jewish or Hebrew children. It establishes for us several major themes concerning God himself. These themes, I'm going to share them. They're not a part of the outline that you all will have on the screens, but you can, for those of you who are taking notes, you may want to write them down. The first theme that is contained in the book of Genesis when it comes to God is his desires for us. His desires for us. The Lord wants to hook you up and keep you hooked up. Hey, kids. There's a lot that your parents want to do for you. And some of it they're able to do. Some stuff they're not able to do. But some of the things they desire to give to you and to do for you, you won't be nice enough to receive them. They really wish they could do more for you. They really wish they could give you everything that you desire. But sometimes you just won't do right. Amen. Husbands. It's some stuff your wife want to do for you, but because you show such little appreciation for the things she already does, she's only operating at 10% of her capacity. Wives, there's some things your husband wants to do for you. And if sometimes they may have the means, at other times they do not have the means, but if they have the means, they want to know that whatever they do for you is going to be appreciated. Amen. They want to upgrade some things in your life. You're getting ready to go car shopping, and in his mind, all he's saying is, all we getting is something to get from point A to point B. Because that's the only kind of loving you provide, is point A to point B. You don't get no CD player. You don't get no MP3 player. You don't get no leather. You don't get no alloy wheels. You're going to get just enough to get by, because all you give is just enough to get by. Now, if I'm not talking to you, I'm not talking to you. Amen. If you own your job, thank God you own your job. There ought to be some wives in here, either with your husbands or thinking about your husband. You say, Pastor, that ain't the one I got. He will do anything and everything for me. When I tell him to jump, he just wants to know how high. There's some husbands in here who say, Pastor, you're not talking about my wife. She'll bring home the bacon. Wish I had some old school saints. Bring home the bacon fried up in the pan, and never ever let you forget you a man, because she's a woman. I wish I had somebody. Help me, somebody. God has desires for us. There's some things he wants to do for us. That's one of the first themes you find in the book of Genesis. His desires for us. He wants to bless us. Second theme that you find in the book of Genesis is his compassion or his love for us. He not only wants to bless you, but he loves you and he shows compassion to you. The third thing you find when you read the book of Genesis is God's standard of holiness. His standard of holiness, which means even though he desires to do things for you, and even though he loves you and shows you compassion, he's still holy. And one thing about the holiness of God is by ourselves, we could never measure up to God's standard of holiness. That's why you got to be careful when you look down on other people. None of you in here would do that. There's some folks in Massachusetts at a church there that have this problem. You should never look down on people because they sin differently from the way you sin. No need of lard talking about butter when both of them are greasy. So you see his standard of holiness. But then there's a fourth major theme contained in the book of Genesis, and it is his mercy towards us. His mercy towards us. His desires for us, his compassion or love for us, his standard of holiness, and then his mercy towards us. In Genesis 1, in Genesis 2, in Genesis 3, and in Genesis 4, you find all four of those themes repeated when you read those 4 chapters. Notice what you find when you read Genesis chapter 4, verse 1 through verse 3, just that first word or statement in verse 3. Look at chapter 4, Genesis 4, verse 1. Adam slept with his wife. She conceived and had Cain. She said, I've gotten a man with God's help. Then she had another baby, Abel. Abel was a herdsman and Cain a farmer. Time passed. Cain brought an offering to God from the produce of his farm. Abel also brought an offering, but from the firstborn animals of his herd, choice cuts of meat. God liked Abel and his offering. Over and over again, you find all 4 of those elements present. In Genesis 1 and 2, you find God's desires for us, how he hooked us up by creating this universe and placing us in charge of the universe. Then in Genesis chapter 2, you find his love and compassion for us when he created us in his own image. I love the fact that everything that God created, he spoke to it to help bring it into existence. When he wanted to create vegetation, he spoke to the ground and commanded the ground to bring forth seed that bore more seed and produced vegetation throughout the entire globe. He does that in Genesis 2. He spoke to the ground. When he wanted to make aquatic life, he spoke to the sea and said to the sea, bring forth all manner of fish and things that live within the sea. When he wanted seed, he spoke to the ground. When he wanted fish, he spoke to the sea. But when he wanted a man and woman, he spoke to himself and said, let us make man in our own image and in our own likeness. That's love and compassion. You find it in Genesis chapter 1 and in Genesis chapter 2. But then you also find God's standard of holiness in those 2 chapters. God said, I'm going to give you every good-looking tree you could ever want to eat. I'm going to give you even the tree of life, that if you eat of it, you will live forever. He said, but there's one tree that you are never to eat of, because when you eat of that tree, the part of you that connects me to you will die. It wasn't the death of their physical bodies. It was the death of the spiritual connection that God established with them when he breathed into man's nostrils the breath of life. That's why when Nicodemus came to Jesus by night, Jesus said to him, "You must be born again." Nicodemus says, "Does that mean that I've got to crawl back into my mother's womb and be born a second time physically?" Jesus said, "No, that which is born of the flesh is flesh, but that which is born of the Spirit is spirit." You must be born again. God has a love for you. You find it in Genesis 1 and 2. He has desires for you. You find it in Genesis 1 and 2. But then he has a standard of holiness. There is a standard that he holds us to. But then you see God's mercy towards us when you get to Genesis chapter 3. Because even after Adam and Eve messed up, they're still alive in Genesis 4. Have you learned yet to appreciate that the Lord could have cut you off a long time ago? Have you learned to appreciate that the Lord could have exposed you a long time ago? Or somebody says, "Pastor, exposure wouldn't bother me." Yeah, it would. Yeah, it would. It'll bother you in your home. It'll bother you on your job. It'll bother you in your neighborhood. It'll bother you in your community. It will bother you in your church. Thank God for cologne and peppermints. The Lord will cover you, and he has been covering you. You say, "Pastor, I don't do none of the stuff I used to do." It ain't because you don't want to. Some stuff you wish you could do. You just can't. That's why you hate on other people who can. And then complain about their sin, because even the sin that's in your heart. Some of you have never committed murder, but if you got mad enough to want to kill somebody, Jesus says it's just as bad. Some of you have never committed adultery or fornication, but if it existed in your heart that if you had half a chance, you would have, then Jesus said it is just as bad. Now that don't mean go and do it just because it showed up in your heart. So God still dealt with them in chapter 4, even though they sinned in chapter 3, they are still alive. Yeah. And when you read chapter 4, verse 3 through verse 16, you meet two of the children of Adam and Eve, their first two male children, the oldest son, Cain, and the younger son, Abel. Cain made an offering that he gave to the Lord. Abel also made an offering that he gave to the Lord. God did not approve of Cain's offering. He approved of Abel's offering. And as a result, Cain rises up and kills his brother Abel. When God looked at the offering of Abel, he speaks of that offering in verse 4 and says that Abel also brought an offering, but from the firstborn animals of his herd, choice cuts of meat. God liked Abel and his offering. And I wish that was where the story ended, but some stuff popped off after Abel gave God his best. And what makes that important is because some of the exact same things that happened to Abel will and should happen to you. Let me walk through them very quickly. The first thing that this text proves to us in the end of verse 3 on into verse 4 is that when you give God your best, God will see you. God will see you. Can you imagine hey, there's somebody in this church. I don't know who it is. I got an idea of who it is, but I don't know who it is. Several weeks ago, there was a light bulb out in the church. And normally, when there's a light bulb out in the church, I'm normally the one who ends up changing the light bulb. So I came back in the next Sunday, and the light bulb had been changed. I don't know who changed the light bulb, but I see you. I see you. I see you looking out for your church. I see you looking out for your pastor. I see you. And how do you think God feels when he sees you doing right when you want to do wrong? When he sees you blessing those that your flesh tells you ought to be cursing. God says, I see you. I see what you done hooked up down there. I see what you're doing. You got it going on. God will see you. When you read verse 3 and verse 4, the offering that Abel gave, God took pleasure in his offering and rewarded him as a result of seeing what he had done. When you give God your best, Brother Steve, God will see you. That's not all. When you give God your best, the devil will see you. He will. Now, don't think you can have it one way without having it both ways. God is going to see you, but the devil is going to see you too. Verse 3 says, time passed. That's important to note, that those words are not just placed there merely as spacers or filler. The fact that the text mentioned that time passed is to explain that now this was the first family, the first family, the first family. And also remember that in the first family, they lived much longer than we live today. In the book of Genesis, you read about a man named Methuselah who lived 969 years. So by the time that these offerings are made, we don't know exactly how old Cain and Abel were because time had passed. It's also important to note that when Eve gave birth to Cain, she rejoiced in the fact that God had helped her to have a male child, which means more than likely that she had already had a number of female children, and she rejoices that she had finally gotten a male child. So, because somebody is wondering, because when you get to the end of Genesis 4, the Bible talks about Cain's wife and Cain moving to a different land and not wanting people to kill him. And the question becomes, if there was just Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, where did all these other folks come from? So Eve had some daughters first, then she starts having sons, and back in Genesis now, this is the first family. It became a necessity for sisters and brothers to marry one another because they were starting the human race. Starting the human race. You shouldn't be able to celebrate your anniversary and your family reunion at the same time. Just want to put that out there. Because cuz might be sweet, but that's cuz. Amen. That's why some folk glowing in the dark today. Because they didn't check before they found out who somebody was. They should have did some checking. Time passed. Cain brought an offering to God from the produce of his farm. Abel also brought an offering, but from the firstborn animals of his herd, choice cuts of meat. God liked Abel and his offering, but Cain and his offering didn't get his approval. Cain lost his temper and went into a sulk. God spoke to Cain, "Why this tantrum? Why this sulking? If you do well, won't you be accepted? And if you don't do well, sin is lying in wait for you, ready to pounce. It's out to get you. You've got to master it. Obviously, Cain didn't listen. Cain had words with his brother. They were out in the field. Cain came at Abel, his brother, and killed him. Who do you think put it in Cain's heart to kill his brother Abel? It was the devil. Hey, and here's how we know it was the devil. When you read Genesis chapter 3 and verse 15, you find that God warned the devil that because he tricked Eve into eating the fruit that she was not supposed to eat, ultimately she gives the fruit to Adam. He eats it. The whole human race was sold down a river of sin. But watch the warning that God gave to the serpent in chapter 3 and verse 15. God said, I'm declaring war between you and the woman, between your offspring and hers. He'll wound your head, you will wound his heel. From that moment on, the devil was watching the offspring of Adam and Eve to see which one he could jump in. And he watched long enough, watched all those daughters, couldn't get any of the daughters to cut up. But then he watched that oldest boy, Cain, who appeared to be all right until his younger brother, Abel, gave an offering to God. God liked Abel's offering and disliked Cain's offering. And the devil said, I'm jumping in him. Let me share something with you for free. The devil is not the opposite of God. God is too big to have an opposite. The devil started off as an angel who got too big for his britches and got kicked out of heaven. That sank in. Some of us look angelic, but don't get too big for your britches. Because anything that you exalt, God will throw down. But whatever you humble, God is able to raise it in his own time. If the devil was watching to see the behavior of Cain and Abel, he's watching your behavior too. The devil is watching you. The devil is watching you to see how well the Sunday morning version of you matches up with the Monday morning version. Because he's looking for somebody on your street, in your neighborhood, on your road. He's looking for somebody to see who gonna clown. He'll get in a choir. I've been in church all my life. The devil will get in a choir and watch the choir to see if he can find somebody weak-minded who can keep trouble going on. The devil will get in an usher's ministry to see who it is in the usher's ministry that he can jump on. He too lazy to walk in church. He just wait to find somebody who ain't prayed all week long, jump on them and ride them into the church. He'll get in ushers, he'll get in choir members, he'll get in church leaders who want to fight. We don't have these problems here. People who want to fight over stuff that ain't even worth fighting over. The color of the carpet. Ford versus Chevy. All of them going to break down one day. I want my name on my chair. Buy a chair. Keep it at your house. Put your name on it. But you ain't going to have none in here. What's your name? on it. This ain't that kind of party. Excuse me, Brother Pastor, I would like to reserve a seat right there. Not in here. One of my pastoral friends and colleagues was the target of social media this past week because of a number of things. He had what ordinarily would be called a secular recording artist to sing at his church. And because that secular recording artist was singing at his church, it brought some other secular recording artists who don't ordinarily come to church. And when they came to church, after church, they got on social media and they said that what happened in church that day was a financial shakedown. What the recording artist said was that the offering had already been lifted. But when they saw these millionaires come in, they decided to lift another offering, which is there's a word my parents didn't allow me to say, so I'm not going to say it in church. That's a falsehood. That's an untruth. The church didn't lift another offering just because those people walked in. The church was doing a special emphasis that day. They had invited a special guest speaker all the way from Houston, Texas, to motivate the church in the area of eliminating the church's debt, which is $30 million. The church has a new pastor. He wants the church to be debt-free so that they can do more to help their community. They have already given tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars in the last 12 months alone to people in need in the Atlanta area. So this offering was not lifted just because the millionaires walked in. Let me tell you where the church messed up, though. When the millionaires walked in, after the service had started and after the offering had been lifted, they reserved a seat for them on the front row. Got to be careful who you invite in your house and where you put them. And the reason they had to deal with so much backlash, if those fellas would have been in the back of the church, it wouldn't have mattered to them when the offering was lifted for a second time. But because they brought them all the way down to the front row, it made them assume that the offering was a stick-up. The devil will see you. Even when you give God your best, know that the devil is always watching. Not only will he get in a choir, not only will he get in leaders, not only will he get in preachers and church folks, the devil will get in your house. The devil is watching your kids to wonder which one of them he can jump on. The devil is looking through your window to see which spouse goes to bed and doesn't thank God for keeping them up all day long. And say, I'm going to jump in that one. Say, I'm going to tear this house up. I'm jumping in that one because they're weak and won't pray, won't read. They know all the desperate housewives of Williston, but don't know the difference between Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. He can name every starting player on the Gators front line, but doesn't know the difference between the Old Testament and the New Testament. The devil will see you. All right? God will see you. The devil will see you. Let me give you a third one. Your brother will see you. When you give God your best, God will see you. The devil will see you. But then your brother will see you. Look at what you find in verse 8 down through verse 10. Cain had words with his brother. They were out in the field. Cain came at Abel, his brother, and killed him. I wonder what the conversation went like. We're not told what the conversation was. I firmly believe, Sister Linda, that it didn't matter what the conversation was because it was so deeply embedded in Cain's heart to kill his brother until anything that he said would have pushed him over the edge. Cain had words with his brother. They were out in the field. Cain came at Abel, his brother, and killed him. God said to Cain, "Where is Abel, your brother?" He said, "How should I know? Am I his babysitter?" God said, "What have you done? The voice of your brother's blood is calling to me from the ground. What have you done?" Your brother will see you with his sorry self. That's part of the outline. Your brother with his sorry self will see you. How do we know your brother is sorry? Look at the offering that he gave. It's in verse 3. Time passed. Cain brought an offering to God from the produce of his farm. The problem was not that Cain was a herdsman or Cain was a farmer and Abel was a herdsman. That their occupations was not the problem. The problem with Cain's offering is all he did was brought an offering. You know what that means? Cain had a harvest and brought God the leftovers. Sorry self brought God the scraps, the leftovers, the stuff that he didn't want. He brought to God. My dear friend and distant mentor, Reverend Dr. Jasper Williams Jr., who pastors the Salem Bible Church in Atlanta, tells the story of how when they built a brand new church building, some of the members came to him and said, "Brother Pastor, I would like to donate a couch." The family said, we're getting all new furniture at our house, so we want to donate our couch to the church to put in your office. The member said, "Now, the couch needs to be reupholstered, but we'd like for you to have it at the church." Another member came to him and said, "Brother Pastor, we have a water picture that we want to donate to the church for you to put in your office." She said, "Now the handle is broken off of it, but we think you can use it down at the church." And as Dr. Williams was telling us this story, he said, "I ain't going to tell you what I said." And then he did tell us what he said from the pulpit. I can't repeat it in here because I need to keep my good job. But here's the gist of it. Keep your couch. Keep your picture. I don't want it, he said. Don't give God something that you won't have. Your brother will see you with his sorry self, just bringing the leftovers. Your brother will see you with his sinful self. In verse 9 through verse 10, you see the sinfulness of Cain. God said, "Where is Abel, your brother?" He said, "How should I know? Am I his babysitter?" God said, "What have you done?" Your brother will see you with his sorry self, with his sinful self, but then with his selfish self. This dude was a trip. And when the devil gets in you, he'll make you a trip. You wondering about some of the people in your life, why they act the way they act, how they can do the things that they do. Let me tell you this, when the devil got hold of somebody, it ain't much they won't do. You say, "But I never thought they'd do that to me." Wait till the devil get in them. The devil will get in some folk and have them doing all kind of stuff. The devil will get into people that you thought were your friends only to have you discover that they have become your enemy. Judas walked with Jesus for 3.5 years. Jesus trusted him so much until he let him carry the money bag, even though he was stealing out of it. How you hang out with Jesus for 3.5 years? How do you walk with him healing the sick and raising the dead and still turn out to be a devil? Sell him for the price of a common slave. When you're all wrapped up in yourself, it'll pull you to some low places. Look at verse 11 through verse 14. Here's what God said to Cain. Actually, starting in verse 10, God said, "What have you done? The voice of your brother's blood is calling to me from the ground. From now on, you'll get nothing but curses from this ground. You'll be driven from this ground that has opened its arms to receive the blood of your murdered brother. You'll farm this ground, but it will no longer give you its best. You'll be a homeless wanderer on the earth." And here's how he responded. Cain said to God, "My punishment is too hard. I can't take it." Grow up. Grow up. You know what a coward is? Somebody who will throw a rock and hide their hands. Throw a rock and hide their hands. Talk big on the internet, ain't got nothing to say in person. Superman on the keyboard, Clark Kent in Walmart. If you're so tough that you killing brothers, why can't you handle the punishment that God has handed down? It's too much. I can't take it. Wrapped up in himself. When you give God your best, God will see you. When you give God your best, the devil will see you. When you give God your best, your brother will see you with his sorry self, with his sinful self, with his selfish self. But when you give your best, fourthly, God will remember you. Verse 10 says, God said, "What have you done? The voice of your brother's blood is calling to me from the ground." God will remember you. That's just how good God is, that he will remember you. Which means people may be trying to destroy you, but God will remember you. Some folks in this room, your name stays in other people's mouths. They always talking about you, and you ain't bothering nobody. You ain't saying nothing to nobody. You minding your own business. You ain't throwing no shade. Problem is, you just shining so bright until your shine creates shade. See, when your light is shining, you're surrounded by shadows. That's shade. And if you don't have no light, you won't have no shadow, which means you won't cause no shade. But if you got some light going on, somebody's not going to like you. They don't have to know you. They don't even have to know your name. So Knox, I was with a group of people on yesterday watching the Gators play. And we were having a great time. The food was delicious. The fellowship was wonderful. After the current quarterback, who is quarterbacking because the regular quarterback is injured, the current quarterback threw a touchdown, and somebody in the crowd said, "What's the name of the old quarterback?" What they were saying was, forget about him. From now on, there's a new sheriff in town. Isn't it funny how quickly people can turn on you. How quickly people will forget about you, regardless of what you've done for them. It's amazing how quickly people will turn on you. But God will remember you. Did you hear what I said? God will remember you. Even if the world is looking down on you, God will remember you. All right, so number one, when you give God your best, God will see you. The devil will see you. Your brother will see you with his sorry self, with his sinful self, with his selfish self. But then God will remember you. Here's the last thing, and I'm out. God will remember you and your brother. You say, well, wait a minute. You mean to tell me the same way God remembered me, he's going to remember my sorry, sinful, selfish brother? You better hope so. This room is not full of heroes. This room is full of villains who every now and then have some heroic moments. The Bible is not a book of heroes. The Bible is a book of villains. Because ain't but one hero, and his name is Jesus. And the reason you need to be all right with God remembering Cain is because all of us got a little bit of Cain in us. You know what that's called? The mercy of God. God is merciful. Look at verse 14 through verse 16. After Cain says, I can't take it, you too hard on me. He says, you've thrown me off the land and I can never again face you. I'm a homeless wanderer on earth, and whoever finds me will kill me. God told him, no. Anyone who kills Cain will pay for it 7 times over. God put a mark on Cain to protect him so that no one who met him would kill him. Cain left the presence of God and lived in no man's land east of Eden. God will remember you, but he will also remember your sorry, sinful, selfish brother. And you better be glad he does, because the tables can turn. Because there's some sorriness, some sinfulness, some selfishness in all of us. No room full of heroes, room full of villains who periodically have some heroic moments. Ain't but one hero, and his name is Jesus. And when you see him, if you want to know who he is, just ask him, can you check his hands? Because in the small of each wrist, there'll be nail prints. Ask him, can you check his feet? Because right through the center of each of them will be a hole where a spike was driven through. Ask him, can you check his side? He'll have the scar of being spear lacerated. Ask him, can you check his brow? And I don't know exactly what kind of hair you're going to have. I don't know if it's going to be laying down on his face or sticking up like an afro. But when you can see his brow, it will give evidence that a crown of thorns had been placed upon him. He's the only hero. And all of us need to be looking up to him, which means we don't have time to be looking down on each other. And all the people said, amen.